All right, so GitHub things, I feel like as an overview, um, one thing about GitHub that like really changed the way I like look at my profile was that I spoke to a recruiter once, and he basically said he spends an average of 15 seconds looking at someone's GitHub. And so because of that, I got like really obsessed with trying to like optimize what to put on your GitHub page, not just like your project pages, but also like your profile. You just want to make things as easy as possible to navigate. So I think first I'm just going to go over some like really more basic things with your like overall profile. And I'll show mine, which is not super great, but I'll talk about what you should and shouldn't do. Um, First, you want to make sure that you're pinning your top projects. So on GitHub, you can pin 6 projects, and you can also put them in an order of whatever you want to like them to like see first. Something that you can do that is you can add these descriptions for your projects. So if you go into a project, there is a descriptions that used to be here, but GitHub recently, oh, it's here, it's right here. So in the about, I think you can edit it here. So this is just like a 1 sentence summary of what your project is. And I've learned that it's pretty important, or it's good to say like what kind of project it is. Is it like a text classifier? Is it an image classifier? Is it like a clustering analysis? Those like keywords are good to have in that like about text, just so like here it's obvious like what your project is. So like mine here, I have another classifier, I have a regression, um, classifying paintings, dashboard, things like that. In terms of like what projects to put up there, I know that like as students you have like 5 projects, but as like in your free time, if you do more projects, you can feel free to put them there for sure. But also think about like maybe for the kinds of jobs that you're applying for. I know some people are very like industry focused, like they really want to work in like healthcare, for example. So definitely want to highlight those. Either that, or I usually just like tell my students who are more like industry agnostic to just put like different projects, and that's good. Um, your career coach will tell you to put a professional picture in your GitHub. Mine is not professional. No one has ever yelled at me for that. Um, Also with repositories, I think I mentioned this on Tuesday. James and I mentioned this on Tuesday that like you have a lot of repositories. I have like people have commented about it, but I don't think in a bad way. They're just like, what are you doing that you have so many repositories? But there are scripts out there that were written by like Flatiron students. If you like search the Slack channel, you'll probably find not if you search like the bigger Slack channels, you'll probably find some people's script on like cleaning up those repositories. So there's that. Um, I also had mentioned on Tuesday, but just so it's in this recording, that you want to get your commits green as possible. So mine's not great, but commits are important because it just shows like your activity on GitHub. So committing things that count as contributions are whenever you push something that you're working on. So later I'll talk about like why you should have your own project repo rather than work off the clone copy of the project repo. So make sure you're committing as much as possible. I think your career coach will tell you to do like 10 commits a week. So do that. Also, I had mentioned something about issues, and issues also count towards commits. And so really quickly, what an issue is, let's see, I think this one has an issue. So in issues, I basically would write like what I want to work on in the future, like next steps, like what features I want to add to my project. And each one can be an issue, and each issue counts as a contribution. So that's a great way to like, a very code light way of getting your bar green. So that's pretty much for like the overall project. Sometimes some classes, some cohorts like to have them follow each other on GitHub, so it looks like they have more activity going on. It's pretty cool because you can sort of see like what your classmates are working on. I think that's the less important. So with respect to projects, like your project repo, I think it's very important that this stuff is organized. So I know that if you like clone the project repository from Learn, it has a lot of these like other files that are unnecessary for like employers don't really care about like the rubric of the project. So I like highly recommend just like making a new repo and just working off of there, just so that you don't have that like learned association and it doesn't say like forked from whatever it is. For these files, I always say like try and be as clear as possible. So I personally, I noticed that for your cohort, like you work on like one long notebook, which is good. I personally like to split up because my computer is slow. So I like to split up my notebooks into like an EDA notebook, a modeling notebook, and like a final notebook. So that's just how I do it. It's definitely very subjective. But like everything that you save, like if you save a model, if you pickle anything, I would like put it in a separate folder. If I have any like data files, I think these are like CSVs, put it separately just so it doesn't like clutter up this page, because you want people to get to your README as soon as possible. So that's mostly about like file structure. You just want to keep it as clean and organized as possible. Do we know what git ignores are? All right, so git ignores are pretty important, in my opinion, because it also helps with like keeping this part clean. So git ignore basically tells Git what files from your local computer to not push up to GitHub. So for example, if we look in git ignore here, I don't know if any of these might seem familiar. There's like DS store might be something that you've seen before. Like DS store is something that your computer automatically generates time and time again, like in different folders. IPYMB checkpoints is a pretty common thing that comes up. It's another one of these like automatically generated things, but it's not important for your project. And like if anyone was to like clone down your project, they can rerun it with no problem. So I thought that, I mean, this is a, on GitHub, when you're like creating a repository, there's an option to automatically generate a Python git ignore. So these are like all the things that are in the Python git ignore. And so there are basically all these files that usually you don't want to push up. I think here you also will find like database files, like giant SQLite files, because usually those files are big and you don't want them on GitHub as well. So it's a good idea to like just make a git ignore just so you don't have like these extraneous files on your repo. So that's what that does. And if you have any like passwords for your API, you would store them in like a separate file that doesn't get pushed up to GitHub, so that people on GitHub won't find your like API keys. So that's another thing. So there's that. Let's see. Also, you want to commit a lot, because sometimes they look at the number of commits. And so like if you like finish your project and then upload everything to GitHub, you'll probably have like maybe like maximum like 2-3 commits for like updating things. But if you're constantly working on something, you can see that over like the course of, let's see, this was like January 2019 to like this past February, you can see like you're constantly working on something. So if you have like a particular project that like someone's looking at, they'll see that as well. Sometimes if you do like your presentations, sometimes it's good to also maybe save your presentation as like a PDF and have that here and like label it clearly that that's your like non-technical presentation. Commit messages are also really important. I can show you an example of like awful commit messages where I was really frustrated and my commit messages were trash, and I actually got called out on it, where like someone was like, so were you getting pissed off at like, was something just not working? And I was like, yeah, it wasn't. And so I have been called out on commit messages, and plus commit messages should be, should tell you what you were working on, just so like when you go back to something, you can see past versions of your work. Like you can see like here, I could probably see like what my work looked like last year. And that sometimes might be helpful. If I had like maybe deleted a certain function that I want to bring back, that is useful and easy to find if your commit messages are clear and clean. So that's that. For READMEs, I think READMEs are very, very key, because if you are a recruiter, that's where you find out about the project. And oftentimes like the recruiters might not be technical. I think it's like for the most part recruiters are non-technical, and only if you're having a technical interview then they will be technical. But anyways, for Readme, there are many, many different approaches to doing a Readme. It's definitely based on personal preference. I like to keep my Readmes shorter and not very text heavy, so it's like very immediately clear what's going on. And I highly recommend using taking advantage of all the markdown formatting. So like doing all like the different headers, bolding text, and like using like the formatting like italics or underline just to make things as clear as possible. Because like if someone's looking at your project page for 15 seconds, you want them to like, one, you want them to maybe stay for longer, or like, you know, have your main point across. So it's definitely like, there are different approaches to it. Some people actually like to take their non-technical presentation and turn that into their README. I've seen that that's actually sometimes very effective because your non-technical presentation is, one, is non-technical already, and also it's like very concise because you have to deliver it in like under 7-8 minutes. So a lot of people just like take their notes from the technical from that presentation and just turn that into a README. I've seen some like really concise READMEs where like they straight up at the top say like, I did this model that improved baseline from like 20% to like 80%. And that like giant statistic at the top sometimes can also be like really just good to see. So it's really based on personal preference, I think. I think that sometimes I have had students who just like to put everything on their markdowns. Pros and cons. Because you have everything there, everything's there. But also like when there's a lot of information, it's hard to like hone in on what point you want to get across. So like, for example, for EDA, I wouldn't put more than like 5 graphs. Just put like the graphs that contribute most to your analysis. So that's about README. It's a very subjective thing. But I'm more than happy to like look over any of your GitHubs to like just see what's clear and what's something you might want to highlight more. Within notebooks, because some technical interviews you do go into notebooks. I've had one where they like, it's kind of an informal setting where they like had my project on their computer and I like basically had to talk through what I was doing. This only happened once. Usually I think you just talk about it like face to face, like without like super technical like code and stuff. But try to make your notebooks as easy to navigate as possible. So something that I did was like having like the table of contents is super helpful. I like to number my sections as well because the table of contents numbering doesn't render on GitHub. So I like to like just add my own numbering. And I think like I also like to split up my notebooks so so on GitHub it would render better because I think if your notebooks are too long, it doesn't render. But comment your code as much as possible, or even if you're not like writing those like doc strings, at least like say what you're doing in the function or like in that part of the notebook. This particular project, it was my NLP classification project. So I literally like, I threw my data at every single model because I didn't know what I was doing, but I made it seem like I tested everything because I like listed that like, this is what I wanted to do. When in reality, at that time, I was like, oh, there's this model, let's try that. And I will also admit that this notebook is something that I like went back to and like completely rewrote the notebook after I finished the project. So I tried to like think about what's the best way to show what I did. And so I basically had like a small section for every model. And in the end, I like had like a summary table of every model and like all of their metrics. I don't know if that was super helpful to anyone, but it was helpful for me to like go back and like, wait, let me think about which model did well. If it wasn't like the top model, what other models were like close. And I would like to talk about that as well. So that's something about like notebooks where I feel like oftentimes, because Jupyter notebooks are optimized for like testing a bunch of different things, Jupyter notebooks have the tendency to get really messy and like kind of cluttered. So definitely not something you have to worry about now, but just keep in mind like for the future when you start your job search, you're gonna like clean up some stuff. I definitely like don't have all my projects super clean. Like this is probably my cleanest one, which is why it's like the first one on my profile. Things that you could highlight. Definitely talk about like if you had worked with someone on your project, I think for your part-time court you did it. If you like had merged different data sources together, you want to talk about that, because being able to synthesize data is it's like a big plus. Did you like write a pipeline that collects data from an API and turns it into something like a data frame, or like a NoSQL? Was it like a nested dictionary? If you did something like that, usually you would like define a function that would like take an input of a URL or something. And those pipelines are especially good for like more data engineering jobs. If you have a dashboard, I know like a lot of us are thinking about making dashboards for our projects. And I think in terms of dashboards, is it here? This one is a dashboard, but yeah, you can like add screenshots of your dashboard. This one isn't hosted on a website, so there's no link, but if it could be, definitely throw the link there. And finally, here I have this one note that says, yeah, very important to like talk about how you improved your project, because sometimes even if your final accuracy number isn't high, you did increase it from some number. So that's why I always stress that like have a baseline, like either your first model or like a dummy classifier, or like, yeah, the majority classifier, and just talk about that number. And it depends on what the number is. Sometimes it's better to say like, I got it from like 70 to 90, or you could say that like, if your accuracy started off at like 20%, but you got it to 60%, you could say, I increased it by 400%. Sometimes it sounds a little more impressive, but yeah. So that's like all the GitHub things that I wanted to talk about. I think, yeah, the main point is, I think it's a really good idea to just make your own separate GitHub repo to start working on the project. Cool. Any questions?
Yeah, I had a question about your git ignore on the, I think the Reddit classifier.
Yeah.
Was that one auto-generated, or was that something that you did yourself?
That was auto-generated. So actually, let me actually just show like what that process is like when you're like creating a new repo. So if you create a new repo, there's all this stuff, and then right here you can add a git ignore, and there are different kinds of git ignores. And there's a Python one that you can choose, and it just automatically generates. So something that you might want to change on git ignores is if you have any giant CSV files that, like if you ever try and push a file that's too big onto GitHub, it'll run into issues. So you would put like names of those files on your git ignore. Yeah, that's really important to remember. Git ignores don't appear on your computer because they are hidden files. So like, let's see, let me share my terminal real quick. So let's see, if I go to, let's see what's in here. All right, I have my classifier here. That's that project. And if I ls, you can see like I don't see my git ignore. But I don't know if we know this, but make it a little bigger. But if you do ls-a, it shows you all your hidden folders or your hidden files. So you can see here that's like the checkpoints, that if checkpoints wasn't in my git ignore, it would be pushed up and like mess up my nice folder structure. So this is the git ignore. So you can actually open your git ignore by just doing like open git ignore. And I think it'll just open in whatever your text editor is, and you can just add the name of like whatever the big CSV file is, and it'll automatically not push it up to Git. So like, actually pretty interesting. I don't know if you guys know this, but this .git file is basically what tells Git that it is a Git repo. So when you do like a git init, it really just like creates this .git file. It's like a fun fact. But yeah, git ignores are very useful, especially if you're dealing with like larger data files or sensitive data. Cool. Anything else? Awesome. I'll stop this recording then.